Thank you. Fahim?
Oh, I'm sorry, but I was outside and it took me a lot of time to reach my home. So I'm extremely sorry. And I'd like to congratulate everyone for reaching the second class of this session, first of all, our participants. And I'd like to welcome, extremely, we are lucky to have Joshua Rosenblum sir with us here. It's a pleasure working with you. And this is the first time you are connected with the Dhaka University Research Society. I also like to thank Tanyel Bedia Taysi ma'am. Because of her, we get to see so many political research or electoral research experts with us. And I'd like to say that we already have 44 participants. I think more will come later. They're already incoming. And we will also have another guest from us here, Roman Uddin bhai. He's also working at the CGS, Center for Governance Studies at Bangladesh. He will join later, I think at 10 p.m. in Bangladesh after all of your presentation ends. So I think, yeah, we are ready for the session, and I hope that this will be much better than the opening session because we already know what happened and what are the basics, and now I think we can reach and we can delve into the research designs and the other prospects. So we already have both experts. So I'd like to request everyone to be just don't open your microphone, stay mute and just write everything down in the chat box, whatever you want to say. We would like to continue with the session right now. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Joshua Rosenblum sir and Tanyel Bedia Taysi ma'am for this wonderful session. Ma'am, I'd like to hand over this to you. You just go on as you wish, please.
Sure thing. I will do that. Do you have the PowerPoint? Are you able to put it up?
Yeah. Maidur Rahman bhai, can you just show us the slides? Maidur bhai, possible হচ্ছে কি?
Great. Okay. So what I will do is I will say next slide when I'm ready for the next slide. And I'm going to go off camera just so you're not distracted and I'm not distracted. And then I'll come back on for the question and answers. Thank you. Josh, you can do the same if you want, or you can stay on. All right. So here we are again. And next slide, please. All right. So we are now in module 2 of our overall short course on electoral or elections related research. And so the focus of this module, like Fahim said, is you have the basics, we have the foundational knowledge. Now we're getting into the deep dive of how to actually design elections related research projects. Okay, so next slide, please. Thank you. Here's the focus of our discussion today. And I'm going to try to go through these slides really quickly so we can have a lot more space for questions and answers. And Josh is going to jump in when we get into the examples of the particular types of research projects. So, elections research, definition, scope, and relevance, conducting the literature reviews, because a lot of you were really interested in that, choosing your theoretical and methodological frameworks, and formulating research questions. Next slide. Thank you. So again, let's recap module 1 for Josh and for those of you who are joining today who perhaps weren't able to be here last week. One of the things that we really have to focus on and is often overlooked by researchers is our operationalization, which is defining and measuring what it is exactly that we want to study. If we're saying we want to study women's political participation, what do we mean by political participation? Do we mean just as voters? Do we mean as running for office? Do we mean as serving in office? Do we mean other forms of political participation? We really need to make sure that we are clearly defining what we mean. And so if we want to look at elections, we need to understand the foundations of what do we mean by free, fair, and credible elections? What do we mean by democracy? So this is what we went over in the first session, was defining our terms, at least for this course. None of these terms are universal. None of these terms are agreed on by everybody. But for us, for our purposes, this is our agreement, right? Democracy relies on the will and authority of the people, and free, fair, and credible elections are critical to democracy. It's not the only thing. You can't have a democracy only if you have free, fair, and credible elections, but you do really need to have free, fair, and credible elections to reflect the will of the people. Free and fair elections are inclusive, competitive, transparent, and accountable. And we defined all of these terms. We then said that if elections are free and fair, they can be considered credible. Everybody in a country is an electoral actor, right? As voters, you are an electoral actor. Political parties are electoral actors. However, states and governments are the main electoral actor because they are responsible for planning and holding free, fair, and credible elections. And electoral management bodies, EMBs, are the key electoral actors that do this, that plan and hold elections. Electoral systems are rules and procedures that determine how elections are conducted and the results of the elections. These are things like first past the post, proportional representation, mixed systems. The electoral cycle begins the day after the previous election and ends on the day of the next election. So when we're looking at elections and researching elections, we don't have to only think about the day of the election. We need to think about the months and years leading up to that election and then after it. And so you as researchers don't have to just wait for an election to happen to do research on elections. You can conduct research on elections at any time because there's always something to look at. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. So when we get into the research design, the first thing that we need to do, which you all know this, is identify exactly what it is you want to research. What's your objective and why do you think it's important, right? So for the purposes of my example that I'm going to be giving you, what I'm interested in researching is how inclusive elections are in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. So to recap and go back, our definition of inclusivity, to have an inclusive election, every voter who's eligible by law, and again, we looked at yesterday, somebody asked a question, not yesterday, the last session, somebody asked a question about, what if somebody engages in really, really egregious hate speech? Should they be allowed to vote? I mean, that's up to the country, the laws of the country. So whoever is eligible to vote by law is able to do so, whether they do so as a voter, as a candidate, or to serve in office, right? This means everybody, not just some people, not just men, not just people who are, Bengali, not just people who are Muslims, not just people who don't have a disability, not just people who have an education, right? Every single person that lives in Bangladesh who by law is eligible to vote or run for office or serve in office should be able to. There shouldn't be barriers to their participation. Thank you. Next slide. All right, step 2. So you've identified what it is you want to research. For me, I want to research inclusivity in elections in Bangladesh. I know that. So now I got to go and look and see what's out there. There might be a million studies out there already on this, and so there's no need for me to conduct my research. Or maybe there is 500 studies out there, and so I need to go through all of them and see where the gap is, right? You need to identify the gap in the literature. That will help you narrow down. That will help me in my study on inclusivity narrow down what I want to look at. Maybe there's a ton of studies already on inclusion of people with disabilities, let's say. There isn't, but let's say there is. And there's not a lot on the inclusion of women. So after conducting my literature review, I realized that there's already so much out there on disability that I don't need to look at that. There's nothing there for me to add to the literature. However, there is a space for me to add to the literature on the inclusion of women. And I think you all have conducted several literature reviews, but obviously you need to focus on the wider literature from all over the world, from other countries, right? So let's say it's inclusive elections. I will need to conduct my literature review on inclusive elections around the world. So this will help me create my theoretical framework. How are people looking at it? What theory are people using when they're looking at this subject? It might have no relevance for Bangladesh, or it might have relevance for Bangladesh. So you need to cast a really wide net to help you figure out the theoretical framework. Then you focus in a little bit more. You look at South Asia, and you look at those that are coming out of Bangladesh, hopefully by Bangladeshi scholars and researchers such as yourself, both in English and Bangla. So cast a wide net internationally to get your theoretical framework. Then you can come down smaller and smaller and get more targeted to see what's actually come out of Bangladesh. You can look at the gray literature, which is things like briefing papers from CSOs, think tanks that write on this subject. So it's not necessarily academic literature coming from a peer-reviewed journal, but it is still relevant literature. And you can find that online. You can go to the websites of organizations that you know work on this subject. Places like IFAS, places like NDI, IRI. Josh will have some good ideas as well. I'm going to let him chime in on this slide. And then another really good thing to look at is technical assessment mission and election observation reports. And I know Josh was involved in one of these from Bangladesh, right? So the EU does a lot of election technical assessment mission reports, and I've included a link here for you on their Bangladesh one, and I'll make sure these slides are shared. And then also Josh was involved, NDI and IRI, also on the last national election in Bangladesh, conducted a joint technical assessment mission. And so these technical assessment reports, again, not only from Bangladesh, but from all over the world, you can go in and try to find these reports and see how other people are researching elections, how other people are engaged in election observation, which is a very specific technical type of research that I don't do. I think Josh might have done some, but you can find these assessment mission reports and they are great resources. And then of course, academic literature, articles published in peer-reviewed journals and books. So I'm going to stop now. Josh, do you have any other tips on the literature that you think could be helpful?
Well, I mean, you covered a lot, like international NGOs like NDI, IRI, IFAS, specifically if they work in the election sphere and do technical assessment missions or observations. Obviously, other international organizations like the EU or the UN frequently do reporting on this. I would also make sure to do research in terms of, if you're talking about something like inclusivity, data from past elections from the Election Commission. Now, of course, people have ideas about what the truthfulness or accuracy of this data is, but there is a good amount of data there that you can use to compare, even if it's not particularly, even if it's not 100% accurate. So past election data is a huge thing. And also simply being able to research past journalism. A lot of data can be gleaned from past articles and information from newspapers, periodicals, things like that in the lead up to various elections. So I'd say that that is pretty good for covering for most of the electoral research literature.
Thank you, Josh. Excellent. So yes, newspapers for sure. Need to add that there on this slide. Okay, next slide. All right, so choose your objective, which we've already done. Let's say for my, research project, I'm wanting to look at women's participation in elections. Then you need to choose your theoretical framework if you need it. Not every research project needs a theoretical framework. I always try to do it as much as possible because I find it to be really, really helpful to have that guiding framework, but you don't have to have a theoretical framework for everything. If you're doing a small research project, it might not be, informally, it might not be as important. Then you have to have your methodological approach and then formulate your specific research questions. So, what are your objectives? What is your overarching theoretical framework, and what are your questions, right? And you find your theoretical framework from the literature review. Like I said, this is how you look at how are people talking about this subject. When people talk about inclusivity, what framework are they using? Are they using a intersectional lens? I like to use a power lens, right? So this tells you what the theoretical framework is. Key tip here, and I think you all know this, but just to reiterate, methodology and methods are different. Your methodology is the overarching strategy and justification for your research and why you're choosing specific techniques. And I'll give you an example of like from my research, why I chose this methodological approach. Like if you're choosing qualitative or quantitative or mixed method approach, that's your methodology. Then your methods are the specific tools and procedures that you use within your methodology. Your key informant interview scripts, your survey questions, your focus group guides, etc. That's your methods. Okay, great. Next slide. All right, so this step is incredibly important, which is your methodological approach. And Josh, I'll have him chime in as well here. But so methods are tools in your toolbox. As researchers, you have toolboxes, your methodologies, and you have specific methods within them, right? Also part of your toolbox. So we have to pick the right methods and the right methodology for our objectives. We all know that it's not one size fits all. Both qualitative and quantitative approaches have real value, and we need to pick the right one depending on what kind of electoral phenomenon we are seeking to explore, right? So when I was getting my PhD, we were all still in political science. It was very, very much still, everything was focused on quantitative research. Like you need to do these large end statistical studies, you need to use SPSS, you need to do a longitudinal study. And for the things that I wanted to study, things like people's beliefs, people's feelings, norms, structural barriers, things within society that maybe they're not tangible, especially social norms, but they're there. You just can't capture that with a large N, quantitative study. You need to do a deep dive. You need to talk to people. You need to talk to people more than once. You need to really understand the nature of the phenomena you're trying to look at. So I felt a little marginalized because everybody wanted to do these big studies. Now, luckily, I was able to find some professors who also did the kind of work I was interested in doing. But don't feel like only one is better than the other. They're all valid. It just depends on what you're trying to study. Next slide, please. All right. In general, and again, you know this, but I just want to highlight it. Quantitative deals with numbers and statistics and is used to test or confirm theories and assumptions. It's generally suited more for large N studies with closed-ended questions, right? So you're not giving people a chance to go into why they're saying what they're saying. They just can say, they can choose yes or no, a 1 to 5, Likert scale, but you can't get at the why. You get at the what, but not necessarily the why. So you can get a really wide amount of data, but not deep. Whereas qualitative, words and meanings helps us to understand the why, understand the concepts, thoughts, lived experiences. It helps you gather in-depth insights, but it's most suited for smaller N studies and open-ended questions. It's very deep, but not wide, because it takes a long time. You're talking to one person for 2 hours, really getting in to details, asking why, asking open-ended questions. So you can't talk to 3,000 people. Whereas with a quantitative study, you can reach 3,000 people, but you're just not going to get super, super deep. Josh, do you have anything to add here?
No, I'd say that's pretty much on point. Obviously, again, both quantitative and qualitative research support each other. So a lot of times, like a project I'm working on at the moment, we're doing a lot of focus groups and trying to get a lot of qualitative data in terms of what messages people respond to in terms of a certain sector of the electorate here in the United States. And then be able to use that information to be able to test that in polling on a wider scale. So in other words, getting the ideas and the understanding of why people are thinking why they're thinking about things about certain issues, and then being able to craft messages that may be able to respond to that, and then testing those messages on a quantitative basis that will give us a really hard look at whether or not it's effective with the audiences that we're trying to target. So they both work in tandem. And of course, like Tanyel said, it depends a lot on what your research question or what you're trying to find out is.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Next slide, please. All right. So here we're going into my example study. So this is, I'm not just going to tell you need to do these things. I'm now going to show concrete examples of how this process works, right? So I've decided, right, based on my literature review, that I want to conduct a study on women's electoral participation in Bangladesh. And based on my analysis of the literature for my theoretical framework, I've found that a lot of the studies on women's political participation use a power lens. If you hear a weird sound behind me, it is just my cat crying. So there's nothing wrong. There's just a cat being very vocal, but I don't want to mute my microphone. Okay, so I found out through my lit review that using a power lens seems to be something that is very interesting because of social norms, because of patriarchy, because of the differing power differentials between men and women, women often around the world are not able to access political spaces as easily as men can. And it is because of the way that power is distributed in societies and cultures. Men have the power to engage in formal politics. Women do not. So that's already been established by the literature. So I don't have to go in and establish this and prove this. It's already been proven. So this is the framework that I'm going to use. So I'm going to use this power lens to seek to understand women's inclusive electoral participation. I want to then be very practical because I don't want this research to just be for the sake of doing research, because that's extractive. There has to be something that comes out of this research that actually helps the people I am conducting research on. Otherwise, my research is exploitative because I'm just taking information from them and I'm not giving anything back to them. So I want to highlight the really practical barriers and challenges and opportunities for women's electoral engagement, political participation, because I want my research to actually add something. So that's really important. So this is my objective and my theoretical framework. And here's how I will explain that, right? This analysis will explore women's inclusive electoral participation. And I define all of these things. I'm going to define all of these things, right, in my study, like we talked about last week. I'm going to define inclusive. I'm going to define electoral participation. And then I'm narrowing it down of what I mean. What I mean is in voting, running for office, and serving in office. I will explore power relations, there's my theoretical framework, that inform and uphold marginalization and exclusion that are codified and upheld by formal and informal practices, policies, and perceptions. Things like harmful gender norms, things like social stigma, that operate across multiple levels of analysis. I know you all know about levels of analysis, right? So I want to research harmful norms, discrimination, and stigma at the individual level, at the family level, the community level, the institutional level, and systemic level. So see how I'm being really clear about what my objectives are, what my theoretical framework is, and what levels of analysis I will be working at. Levels of analysis is also part of your theoretical framework, right? And your methodology. But you do need to kind of talk about what level of analysis you want to look at, because that also matters in terms of what methods you use. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to get into my methodology. So what methods am I going to use? I want to study power. I want to study social norms. I want to look across levels of analysis. This is deep things, and these are deep things that through my literature review, I found there has been some studies on this, but there's not 500 or 600, right? The studies are still relatively limited. So there's a lot of space to still generate knowledge. I'm not at a point that I'm just going to be testing the knowledge that already exists. I need to add to it. So I decided that I want to use qualitative research. And I'm going to use qualitative research through desk research, key informant interviews, and focus groups. Why? Why did I choose these tools out of my toolbox? Because things like sociocultural and gender norms, which are really key to what I'm trying to look at, are best addressed by a primarily qualitative methodology. A qualitative approach can help us understand motivations, attitudes, and processes to gain insight into these local nuances. It'll help us get at culturally specific and contextually rich data. So we need to use qualitative. We can't just go and send 5,000 people a close-ended survey to try to understand these things. Maybe a few steps down the road, let's say once I've really generated knowledge on this, Josh can then figure out a way to create a survey, right? To go and test the whole population on what they think about these things. But the first step is I have to figure out exactly what the situation is, and then Josh can go and test it further. And then I talk a little bit more about what's going to happen in the focus groups and in the interviews, right? So it's the questions that I ask in the focus group and in the interviews are going to be built around guiding questions related to the overarching research questions that we're going to talk about in the next slide. So we're going to have to formulate, overarching research questions, which are these ones here. But then every key informant interview script, every focus group guide will be tailored to the people that are there. We're not just going to ask these boilerplate questions. These questions here are the start. These are the key research questions, but then we need to go in further. And if I'm talking to somebody who is a woman with lived experience of being elected and then having been marginalized after she was elected, I'm going to need to ask her more questions about that. I want to ask her about exactly what happened and when did that happen and why do you think that happened? So the questions are going to be different. So when you're doing your qualitative research, you need to have your overarching questions, but then you have to understand your subject matter through your lit review well enough that you can ask really specific questions and you can go off script, which is something that you can do in qualitative research in a way that you can't in quantitative research. So you can see here how we have the really overarching question: what does meaningful, inclusive electoral participation look like for women in Bangladesh? But then you have these other questions to really get at, okay, how can we make this research useful for the women that I'm talking to, for all women in Bangladesh, for all people in Bangladesh? Because when women have the ability to engage meaningfully in politics, there's lots of research that shows that the entire population benefits, right? So this isn't just about, helping women. This is about helping the entire society. I will get to my last slide, which is methods, and then I want Josh to chime in on what he would do and how he would create a quantitative study on a similar subject. So let's go to the last slide, next slide here for me. Yes, so then your methods. So once you know what you want to research, why, how, what your theoretical framework is, what your methodology is, what your overarching research questions are, then you get into your actual methods, right? And mine, as I said, were key informant interviews, focus groups. Saying here, all of the questions are going to be specifically tailored for the knowledge, the expertise, and the lived experience of the participants. So I'm doing, because I didn't have a lot of time to do this study, let's say I only have 1 week, I can't talk to as many people as I want to. I have to be really clear and find the right people to talk to. So that's also part of your planning is who do you want to talk to? If I'm looking at women's meaningful electoral participation as voters running for office and serving in office, I need to speak to women who have done all these things. I need to speak to women voters. I need to speak to women who have run for office. I need to speak to women who have served in office, and not just one group of women. I need to try to talk to as many differing types of women as I can. I need to talk to civil society organizations that focus on women's electoral participation. I need to talk to political parties. I need to have groups. I need to talk to young women. I need to talk to older women. I need to talk to women from various indigenous groups. I have to speak with as many people as I can in this short amount of time. So that's why focus groups are good, because you can bring together a group of people. So 5 focus groups, each focus group, different people. 1 women academics, 1 women who have ran for office from one political party, 1 from another political party, 1 youth women activists, 1 CSOs that work on this issue, and then key informant interviews with very specific people. So like, for example, for this research that I conducted, because this is actually research that I just got done conducting, with the key informant interviews, I talked to some really high level women, women who maybe didn't have the time to sit in a focus group, but could sit down with me over lunch and tell me about their experiences. So these were the methods that I chose, and within the time that I had, I wish that I had more time, but I didn't, to get at as many people as I possibly could to answer my questions. So I'm gonna close my microphone now. And Josh, do you want to give some examples of how you would do something like this with a more quantitative approach? Over.
Sure. Well, of course, I mean, then if you're talking about inclusivity in politics for women in Bangladesh, if you're doing like these key informant interviews, you're doing these focus groups, the information that you would tease out, perhaps you would want to try and figure out whether or not the general population also thought these things. So if like out of the focus groups that you did or the key informant interviews came out with the concept that people think that women are underrepresented in parliament, or underrepresented in political structures, that's something that you could test quantitatively over the large population, because the qualitative aspect will not give you the ability to generalize across the entire Bangladeshi population. So you could set up a survey that would give you an understanding of like whether or not these problems in terms of representation are acknowledged or understood by the rest of the population, or if you had certain ideas that came out of the focus groups to fix these imbalances, you could test whether or not those fixes or those solutions would be acceptable to the larger Bangladeshi population. And you could be predictive about that. You could say that the Bangladeshi population would support this or would not support it. And I guess that's, again, as you guys know, the difference between the sort of qualitative research and quantitative research. Quantitative research can be generalizable to the entire population, whereas you might be only getting a small subset that might be sort of biased in terms of qualitative analysis, and it can be predictive as well, which qualitative analysis really can't do. But again, you're not getting the depth, you're not getting the drilling down into like the details or the greater overall view of the situation with quantitative research. So again, those are the differences between the two of them.
Thank you, Josh. Great. Okay, next slide, please. We're almost done here. Right, key takeaways. Identify your research objective. Go to the literature review and see if there's a need for that. Identify your theoretical framework and your methodological approach. Pick the right tools out of your toolbox that will fit your objective, your theoretical framework. Choose your methods. And then also I need to add here, ensure that you speak with the right people. Next slide. We're over. I know there's somebody else who's going to speak, so I'm really, really excited to hear that. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Please do share the slides with everybody. And I needed to add Josh's name to this. I'm sorry. Next one I will. Josh is going to answer some of your specific questions that were asked last week when I said I need to research this. And so I researching it. I just talked to Josh and said, Josh, why don't you answer those? So Josh will certainly answer some of the unanswered questions from last week. And then I'm sure there will be many more. But for now, I am going to close my microphone and am very excited to listen to our next presenter if they are here. Thank you.
Ma'am, I think we can continue with the question answer session because the other guest has not yet joined.
Okay, fantastic. So we can close the slide if possible. We don't need to present anymore. And maybe before we get into the new questions, Josh, do you want to go over those other questions that were asked very quickly?
Okay, so if what you sent to me, a couple of things. One was the concept of how can you ask questions that are politically sensitive, and I know that the elections at Dhaka University just happened, and that you guys had said you had problems having people be able to discuss their preferences in terms of candidates. Was that the case? Yeah. So, I mean, pollsters, I know, do a variety of different things to try and get more truthful answers. And obviously, in areas where things are politically sensitive, people have a tendency, you see the non-response rate or, don't know, go up a lot because people are reticent to answer the questions. And that happens even in politically sensitive questions in open democracies, but certainly in areas where there's been history where people feel that they could have serious repercussions for telling their true beliefs. It's a problem. There are a few ways that can get around it. You're never going to completely get around it. But one is when you're doing questions, when you're questioning the survey respondents, it's called a ballot box technique. And basically, it really is literally just having sort of a ballot box that the enumerators carry around with them. And for questions that are considered sensitive, they ask the respondent, this is assuming it's a face-to-face interview, to fill out another piece of paper that essentially is a ballot, right? And then that ballot is not marked off in any way that could identify the respondent themselves. Sometimes it'll have some demographic data on it because you want to be able to sort of possibly segregate things by gender or ethnicity or age, but there's nothing that would tie them to that particular respondent. And they put the ballot in the box, and then it's like in a regular election, no one can tell who said what. During my time at IRI in Bangladesh, we actually started using a ballot box technique that was a little more sophisticated in terms of wasn't actually a physical ballot box, but rather all the enumerators that were doing face-to-face interviews had electronic tablets. And what they would do is they would hand the tablet to the respondent, and the respondent would select, press yes or no, or select whatever the answer was without the surveyor seeing what they had. And we found that this gets much better in terms of accuracy, but you also see the refuse to answer or don't know numbers drop off using that technique. So it's probably saying that people are more confident with being able to do that in an anonymous situation. There's also another method, which is a statistical method, which I've never used or really seen used, but I know they do it to a certain extent. Sometimes they force questions randomly, and it'll be something like they will have for the respondent, they will flip a coin, and they'll say like, if the coin comes up heads, just answer yes, no matter what your viewpoint is. And then if it comes up tails, answer the truth. That way, when everything is tallied, they can't again figure out which person said yes because they were told to say yes, or which they said yes because it was their truthful nature. But because you have that statistical understanding that 50% of the time it's going to come up heads, 50% of the times it's going to come up tails, you can kind of like normalize for it and figure out get more accuracy from that. Like I said, I haven't done that. I know it exists. So that's another way to figure out how to do things more accurately. So I don't know if anybody has any more questions about that in terms of trying to get people to answer more truthfully. Let's see. Some people are in the political arena in Bangladesh are talking about thinking to include e-devices for votes from expatriate workers. How do you see this, and whether actually any country has ever implemented it and the success rates? Essentially, like for expatriate voting in other countries, right? So that you could vote by internet, essentially. Let me know if that's not what you're talking about. I don't know of any countries that have implemented this. A lot of countries are starting to talk about vote by internet, just in general, not just for expatriates. I kind of think it's a bad idea. It just seems to me to be able to open up things, to be able to manipulate the counts easier. I'm not an expert in it, so it would make me feel kind of queasy to vote by internet, but it's certainly a possibility. Like I said, I don't know of anybody who's doing that at the moment, but it has come up. Let's see. Can gray literature like NGO?
No, Josh, go back and answer the ones that I gave you already, because those are the ones that I have no idea on. So there was two more.
Okay.
Then we can go into the questions.
So then I will have to ask you guys a little bit, because one was Tanyel giving me the questions measuring the influence of online content on voting behavior. What do you mean by online content?
Is that person still here in the group today who asked that question?
Were you just talking about social media, or are we talking about some sort of essentially like online, persuasion campaigns, or online news? I'm just want to be more specific
about social media.
About social media. Okay. How would you measure the influence of online content on voting behavior? Well, if you're doing that from obviously from a quantitative analysis, you can simply ask those questions in terms of, if you know what what your research question is. Does participation in social media affect whether or not you're going to vote? Yes or no? Does where do you get most of your news? That's a question that actually we did ask in our IRI polls, and a significant portion, especially of younger people, were getting most of their election-related news from social media. Those are sort of things you can test, whether people are being influenced by social media campaigns. So if you know there's a social media campaign run by some organization that is saying that candidate X has done Y, you can test whether or not that message from the social media is cutting into the electorate by essentially asking them, do you believe that candidate X is doing Y? So actually measuring social media impact is something you can do quantitatively. You can do it qualitatively too, but quantitatively, and you can test it specifically and get a very good generalizable understanding of how social media is impacting the electorate as a whole. Other questions, proxy questions for sensitive political topic surveys. Okay, we did that. And scientific procedures or methods to navigate the percentage of manipulated votes during an election. I guess the question on, the question on that, and just wanted to, how I would say, I just wanted to get your guys' feeling of, what you meant by that. Are we talking about essentially using statistical methods to try and figure out whether an election was fraudulent or manipulated? Or is there some other thing that that question is trying to get at? Anything?
I think it was to see if the election was being manipulated.
All right. So I should first say I'm not an expert in election forensics, especially from a statistical perspective, but I have worked on what we call parallel vote tabulations and various other election observations that are that use statistical methods in some ways to try and figure out whether or not an election was manipulated. Of course, you can use polling and survey research to figure out if people think that an election was manipulated. And that's also, again, something that we did a lot in our IRI polling, which was asking whether people felt the past elections were free and fair, whether the upcoming elections will be free and fair, what types of manipulation people have witnessed or fear, that sort of thing. But in terms of actually taking an election and trying to figure out by statistical methods whether or not it's been manipulated, that is done a lot. I'll go to the past Venezuelan elections, presidential elections a few years ago, where people were using statistical methods to try to pretty definitively prove that the elections were fraudulent. Most of that comes out in a couple of things. One is independent organizations will do parallel vote tabulation. So in every election precinct, as I would say it, or polling location, most countries, they are required to post the results from that polling location. And if you have enough people in your network, those people can collect that data to allow you to run a parallel vote tabulation to see if those numbers are manipulated further up the chain. Statistically speaking, the Venezuelan situation, my understanding is that there was a lot of statistical improbability in official percentages that the Central Election Commission gave out. So in other words, they were giving percentages which were very, very round numbers. So in other words, when you see something that's like 51.20000%, like the numbers don't work like that in real elections. That's a sort of like an indication things are being fabricated, because you'll have the percentages not round off like to 5 zeros. They'll be 51.2678%, right? If you have a lot of numbers that are coming up that are very round numbers, that's a statistical anomaly that is extremely unlikely to have been natural. There are also various tests that people can use in terms of trying to figure out, again, if you have the data from parallel vote tabulation about variance.
Quick question, Josh. What does that mean, parallel vote tabulation? Break that down. What is
parallel vote tabulation is where an independent organization, or actually political parties, will collect the data from the polling location level and do essentially what the Central Election Commission does, just do it independently. So they will collect all the data. They will create their own count of the election, and especially if they're able to put out their data, and the Election Commission does not give out data, which I understand in the Venezuelan case was the situation, where they would not give out their data going down to the polling location level.
How do they collect it? Where do they get their data from?
Well, in every polling location, this is the case in Bangladesh, at least when I was there, and most countries. At the polling location, they do the count for that polling location. Candidate X gets X number of votes. Candidate Y gets Y number of votes. Candidate Z gets Z number of votes, and then that's posted at the polling location. You will have independent organizations that will then take those numbers from the polling location and send that data upward through their organization, and then be able to essentially do a parallel vote count from that differs and is independent from the Central Election Commission.
because I don't know how to do this. So I'm asking for me. How do they go out and talk to the voters and say, "Hey, who did you vote for?"
No.
How
They're
do they
taking
do this?
they're taking the data from the polling location itself, because the
Uh-huh.
polling location are usually required to post that publicly there.
Okay.
Right? That makes it much harder to be able to manipulate the numbers at a higher level, which is usually what has to happen, because it's hard to.
Right.
Let's put it this way: when things are decentralized, it's much harder to commit the fraud. Not impossible, but it's much harder. When things are centralized, it's much easier because you only have to co-opt a certain number of people. When you're talking about thousands of polling locations, it's much more difficult to be able to do that.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah. So this also gets into the, where I do feel I can speak certainly as an expert in terms of political party organization, political parties, why political parties are actually very important for democracy as a whole. Because a lot of people think of political parties solely as ideological or candidate-based, and they are. They're important for signaling ideology. They're important for promoting certain ideologies, or obviously important for promoting candidates. That's what parties do. They exist to elect candidates to office. But parties are also extremely important because they provide the certain resources necessary to be able to run fair elections effectively. So one of the checks for free and fair elections is that political parties will generally be the only organizations that are physically able, that have the resources to be able to put somebody from their organization in every precinct or almost every precinct across the country. Right? You have international organizations, they will not be able to do an observation and be going to every precinct across the country. Even in domestic observation, civil society groups generally don't have those type of resources to be able to have that type of coverage, but political parties generally do. So they can collect that data, and like I said, parties themselves also do parallel vote tabulations, and they have the ability, again, to be in the precincts and try and make sure that the count itself that is posted outside is in fact accurate, or at least somewhat accurate as they can make it, count of the actual votes that actually happened. So those are really kind of the main ways to try and figure it out. It takes not just sort of statistical or quantitative analysis. You need the data to do that quantitative analysis, and that takes a lot of field work and a lot of resources and ability to be able to do that field work and that organizational work on the day of the election.
Thank you, Josh. I see our new guest is here. Roman, hi, nice to see you. So good.
Hello.
So I think
nice to meet you too. Yeah.
I was gonna pass it over to him now, and then we can get into the rest of the questions. And if we don't have time to get to all the questions today, we will make sure we answer them before the next session. Over.
Okay, so should I just continue with the
We're gonna
questions in the chat box?
give he has a little presentation, and then we'll go into the chat box. Fahim can moderate it, and then we'll decide which questions go to the three of us. Thank you.
Yeah, we won't take much time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite, I'm very honored to have our own Roman Uddin Bhai here. Mr. Roman Uddin, Research Associate of the Center of Governance Studies, CGS. And I think most of you have seen him in the Bay of Bengal conversation in the conferences along. So it's my pleasure to have him with us here. And I think he would love to share something about his knowledge about the electoral research and also regarding the DURS election and all other processes. So I'd like to hand it over to you. Please, Roman Bhai.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fahim, and thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. I don't have any presentation or anything because there have two very expert on this electoral research. They have already conducted the session. I'll just say hi and just say something from my own. And I really thank to the honorable speakers who actually share their insight with us, our youth actually. And I'm very happy to have and see that the youth like us are doing this kind of very good initiative currently in Bangladesh. This is very important for us because democracy cannot exist without active youth engagement. I believe that. So yes, as Fahim said, I am Roman. I work in a think tank named Center for Government Studies in Bangladesh as a research associate. So I must begin with humility that I am not expert on the electoral research in academic sense, but yeah, I have had the opportunity to work on the election closely, especially from my work. You know that I'm a researcher working on the democracy and in this matter, and especially I have had the opportunity to work during the last national election in Bangladesh. And all of you know that it turned into a more of one-party exercise election rather than a competitive election last time, yeah. And that's the reason why you have experienced as the July uprising, you know. So that experience gave me a deep understanding of why electoral research is vital for any democratic process, you know. So to me, electoral research is about more than studying on voting data. It means analyzing the system, the process, the behavior of the voters to understand how election reflects or sometimes fail to reflect, like our previous election and the people's views. So this is what actually, from my understanding, I have understood. I think our honorable guest will just make me sure that I'm right or wrong. So one key part of this election,
100% correct. Yes, totally
yeah,
correct.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So what I actually want to very emphasize today is that the very key part of this electoral research is electoral system itself. You know that currently we are many of our political parties is working and they are demanding the peer system. You know, so. After the 1971, from the liberation war of Bangladesh, we are facing the first voting, what is called the FPTP. Yes, right, yeah. So we are now following this one, but currently we are demanding the proportional representation in a peer system, you know. So there are lots of system like under the peer one, there have lots of system like the closed list peer, open list peer, mixed member peer, and others, etc., etc. So what I have learned by closely working with the political parties is that they are just demanding, or somehow some parties are just rejecting the ideas, but they don't have the idea fully what they are proposing and what they are rejecting now. So from our perspective, I think the youth especially, they should have the idea about this matter very closely, and they should have their own voice to say something about this matter. Understanding the system is essential for the reform discussion of currently what we are now doing countries, and this is very important, the countries like us. And also we have to understand, keep it in mind, that we have also example of this kind of systems in Nepal, that they didn't also have the good idea and good example of this one. So yes, contextual analysis is also very important for us. Another thing I will say must is that the voter behavior, we have to study this matter. Why do people vote the way they do? What shapes their preference? Party loyalty, ideology, class, religion, or the new media influences. But analyzing the voter behavior, we cannot fully understand electoral outcomes. I think to give you the simple example, the actual election at Dhaka University showed us the very interesting dynamics about how young voters think about and they behave, right? So you can relate very closely that from the left wing, Meg Muller has more than 5,000 votes, and also from the Chhatr Shibir panel, he just got, I think, more than 40,000 votes. So do you really believe that more than 5,000 students in Dhaka University do the left politics? I don't think so. Do you really believe that the more than 40,000 students do the writing or the Jamaat Islami vote or the politics or the Shibir politics? I don't think so. So why do they vote the leftist one even if they're not a left electoral exercise party, right? They don't do the activism, or they don't do the politics for the left wing, for the right wing, right? So why do they vote for them? We don't have 5,000 voters in Dhaka University. We know very closely that we don't have 5,000 voters for the for a leftist party, right? So this is the matter. Why do they vote this much of votes? Why do the students vote them? And another, I think you can analyze that how much their intact vote they have. If you want to ask me that how do I count them? Yes, you can count it from the DURS election, that the competitor or the person who actually didn't elected as the member from the Shivir panel, you can count what is their, I think, their vote, actual vote, and their given vote, right? So this is another thing to analyzing the voting behavior, the campaign strategies, the media coverage. What my understanding is that this election was not actually the Chatrodol versus Chhatro Shibir election, but it has become the Chatrodol versus Chhatro League or Chhatro Shibir election, right? You can relate it because the Umama or the Bakir or the Bakchash, they are also a very important part of the last July uprising, but they didn't get that much media appearance, media coverage, or so there have another things like campaign strategies, media coverage, electoral integrity, the role of the technology. These are very important for the election, and we should have the knowledge of electoral research also covers many this kind of areas. So yeah, I think I have talked more. I think you have the expertise here to discuss this matter, and you have the question and answer session now. So this is actually from my end. I believe the research is not just about observing the election, it is about strengthening the democracy. So by studying system, behavior, the outcomes, we can identify the weakness, purpose of the reforms, and ultimately work towards the election that truly reflect the people's will. Well, once again, thanks Fahim and thanks the DURS for inviting me, and also all the participants. Thank you so much.
Love it. Thank you. And completely agree. It's like you were in the first session. This is what we're saying, that it's a electoral cycle. You need to look within the entire cycle, not just the day of elections. Election observation is something really important. It's not something that I do. I'm still trying to find a way to get you more information on that if you're interested in it. But as usual, we are on the same page. So I think now let's go into the questions in the chat box. And, some of them are for me and some of them are for Josh. So should we start? Fahim, I know you're really good at kind of moderating this. So do you want to start with, it looks like Mamia Santa asked one?
I think you can continue with this today.
All right. So
just pick, there are lots of questions. Just pick on the most important questions first, okay?
They're all
That's why
important.
I'm going to do.
They're all important, but I will. So I talked about inclusiveness and equal opportunity in democracy, but this individual is wondering, can a citizen who is politically knowledgeable really be considered equal in decision-making to someone who is unaware and uninformed? How should we think about this gap when it comes to electoral participation? Absolutely. This is a massive issue. Those people who are politically knowledgeable have more of an understanding on what the system is. So you need to control for this and look at it in two ways. So when you're trying to find people to interview and talk to, this is why I chose, let's say in my research, really specific people who knew about this subject specifically. I picked my key informant interviews with women who were at the top of their field, right? Academics who were the gold standard in Bangladesh of knowing about this. Women on the Women's Reform Commission, women on other commissions, women who had been already, elected and gone through this. So ones who did have the knowledge and the understanding. However, the point that we want to get to is that all women, if we're talking about women, let's say in inclusive participation, are able to have the knowledge. Because what I found in my research, and this is grounded in other research globally, is that women aren't given the opportunities to be able to become politically knowledgeable, that it's looked down on. And so it's not just that women are not politically knowledgeable because they don't want to be or don't care about it. It's that there are really heavy systemic barriers in place that keep women from understanding politics. So we want to say our goal is not that we just say, okay, if you're a woman who doesn't know anything about politics, we don't want to talk to you. We want to talk to the people that understand things, but then also talk to the women who maybe are not politically knowledgeable and understand that their opinions are coming from that place. See, this is where qualitative can help you. So you can say, hey, this is a group of women who didn't have the opportunities to become politically knowledgeable, but this is what they think about things, right? So you can say, yes, this is coming from a place of empirical knowledge on subject X. This is coming from a place where people weren't allowed to have that knowledge, but we can still listen to them and see what they have to say, right? It's not like their views are not as important or not as valid. They just might not have that level of understanding yet. So you just control for that. You just say, let's say you want to do a focus group. This focus group was done with rural women who have low literacy and maybe haven't had the opportunity to understand politics, but this is what they think. So you can still talk to them, you still should, but you just control for that. So that's how I would answer that. Okay, next question. E-devices. I don't know, Josh, do you want to answer this one from Mohammed Isanul Islam at 856? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Like I said before, e-devices and vote by internet and that sort of thing makes me queasy. I don't know of any countries that are using it quite now, but people are looking into it. And people are looking into it not just for expatriates or people outside the country, but for people in very, within the boundaries of the country itself. I just think it opens up a new technical aspect that we'll find it hard to master and make sure that everything is on the up and up. I don't think it's necessarily impossible, but it just seems to be something that introduces more complication. Also, you have to have an entire infrastructure that's centered around that. You have to have people who know how to use it, how to fix things when things go wrong and the network goes down, which inevitably happens all the time. For expatriate elections or for expatriate voters in elections, I happen to think just doing a paper ballot is fine. If you have Bangladeshis living in New York City, there's a big Bangladeshi expatriate community in Jackson Heights, Queens, in New York City, and where my grandparents are from, and in Astoria, where I went to a Bangladeshi restaurant when I was out there in New York a few weeks ago. They can register, or I would say probably the best, most secure way to do it is just, you register with the Bangladeshi embassy. They send you what we would call an absentee ballot, by mail. You mail that ballot back into the embassy, and then the people in the embassy do the counts on the day of the election, send those results to the election commission, and you have that paper trail, and you have all the paper ballots. Because you've already previously applied for an absentee ballot, they can verify that, yes, you're a citizen of Bangladesh and that you are here in the United States or you're someplace else, and then give you the ballot. And I think that works fine, so you don't need to overcomplicate things. So long story short, I don't feel it's a really good idea to start voting by internet or by electronically, but it's something that's in the air out there. But I don't know of any countries that are doing that for expatriates quite yet.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, I will start answering the next question, and then Josh, you can absolutely chime in. Can the gray literature, like NGO reports or observation missions, sometimes introduce bias into the literature review? And if so, how do you balance that? To answer this overall question, every part of the literature review will have bias in it. As Robert Cox, I don't know, some of you studying international relations, a really famous IR theorist, said, all theory is for some person and for some agenda, right? Some purpose. Nothing. As much as we like to say that you can have a completely scientific approach where there's no bias whatsoever, it's simply not true. There is always bias everywhere, even like in my field, political science, where people try to come up with this paradigmatic theoretical approach that accounts for all bias and it's completely neutral. Not true. There's nothing neutral in theory. Theory is political, right? So there's always bias, no matter what. In the academic literature, in the gray literature, in the news, everything has a bias. What you need to do, again, like I was answering my last question, is just account for that. Understand that, oh, this report coming from this NGO, we know the bias of this NGO. We know that this NGO or this organization has this bias. So you just account for it that way, because there's no way you can get around the fact that there is bias. Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, not very much. I mean, it's, again, everything is biased. There's no totally objective source of information. Even in the hard sciences, you know, there's people have different theories, people have different viewpoints on things that should be as objective as physics, right? In the more social sciences, there's more room for bias, and you just have to understand and try and balance the various sources that you're dealing with to try and get as good an understanding, objective an understanding as you possibly can.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next question is definitely for Josh. Sending electronic devices to embassies and consulates and then gathering the votes.
Right. Well, I mean, that gets into just the, you know, sort of expatriate voting through internet. Again, you can do that. It takes a lot of infrastructure. It takes getting the people in the embassy to be able to understand the infrastructure and fix it when things go wrong, which elections are very complicated and they happen in one day usually. So it's usually things go wrong at the wrong moment, and it's that's usually a big problem. But again, I think doing a paper ballot through absentee ballots mailed, you know, to the people, or people voting if they are within, obviously within a useful range of the embassy, being able to come into the embassy and vote, cast votes, is probably the thing that probably works best. It's not impossible. People are experimenting with it, but it makes all the electronic and internet and, sort of network, electronic network voting makes me a little queasy. I like paper. I think it's something that is hardest to manipulate, of course.
Okay. Thank
Not
you.
impossible.
Agreed. Okay. If I want to conduct a research based on my local women's perception of the election after the July Revolution, whom do I choose as my key informant person? Okay, really good question. So you want to look at your local women, right? So you need to ensure that you are talking to women from your geographical area. So that's number one. Narrow it down to the women within the population group that you want to look at. And then you need to identify the right women. If you're trying to find the broad perspective of different types of women within your community, you need to make sure that you talk to all of them. So a good place to start would be to find a CSO or an NGO that works on women's political participation or works with women in some way in your community, and then have them introduce you to more people. And then you can conduct focus groups with these different types of women, different groups of women within your community, so that you can get their input from as many as you possibly can. And you're not going to be able to get everybody. So start with qualitative, interview a few people who have knowledge on the subject, right? And then maybe find some who, like the last question said, maybe don't consider themselves very politically savvy, but you want to get their opinion too. Then, based on this information you get, you could then create a wider survey, like Josh said, to try to test if what these women told you is reflective of the wider population of women. So you would definitely not want to rely on just one person, because then you would be having that one person's opinion and there would be more bias, right? Like Josh was saying, and I see there was another question later on, the fewer people you engage with, the more bias you're going to have. So you want to actually try to talk to the women themselves rather than talk to somebody else speaking on their behalf, but sometimes that's all you can do. So I would say you need to find the women within your community who are the pillars of the community, who maybe lead CSOs, and then work together with them to find the right people to talk to. And you never force anybody to talk to you, right? That's something, you know, when we get into do no harm and research, maybe some women don't want to talk to you, maybe some do. And so you always have to respect that. But if this is a study that you actually want to do, I'm really happy to work with you and, you know, go through this in a little more detail and make sure that you do find the right people. There's another question about the e-voting. So I want to pass that over right now. We can maybe come back to it if we have more time. How do electoral systems influence political culture? Oh my goodness. Do they push people towards compromise or polarization? Josh, you've got your thumbs up, so I'm going to let you answer this and then I'll chime in later if I feel like it. Great question.
Yes. Okay. One thing, again, like I said, I'm more of an expert in terms of political party work and political structures. I did have a chance, and then electoral systems is actually something I do a lot of, or have done a lot of work in. I was an advisor to the Afghan Special Election Reform Commission in Afghanistan. They have the same questions because they were looking to try and change their electoral system. And they would always ask me, what's the best electoral system? And I tried to get across them. Different electoral systems do different things. I would say just at the beginning, you have to have the difference between the electoral system and the governance system. So in a governance system, you can have a parliamentary system like you have in Bangladesh, or you have in the UK, or in a lot of places in Europe. Where the executive branch, the government ministers and the prime minister and everything like that are come from the legislature. So you get a majority in parliament, and then that party that forms a majority, or that coalition forms a majority, then creates the government. Or you can have a presidential system, or what's usually called a presidential system, where you have the executive branch and the legislature very separate. And they're elected separately. They're for fixed terms. So in a parliamentary system, usually the government survives only as long as it has a parliamentary majority. Whereas in the United States, you know, we have the president. We have the president for 4 years, no matter what happens. So you have those two governance systems. Then you have the electoral system, which is how you actually elect the people within the government, the legislature, or the executive. Definitely different electoral systems can encourage compromise, or can encourage polarization. The first past the post system kind of tends to, how do you say this? It requires compromise in one sense, in terms of, like, in the United States or places that have first past the post systems like the UK or Canada, first past the post systems, or the technical name is single member district plurality, kind of force compromise between elements within the parties. Because in Europe, most of the various types of ideological differences within parties, they would have their own parties. There would be a Green Party and a Libertarian Party and a party that's involved, it's a religious-based party, or the party that's based solely on free market economics or leftist economics, or these sort of things. Whereas in the United States, or in places that have single-member district plurality, there's a tendency where they have to come to compromise within the party, because when you vote for somebody in first past the post system, you need to get a plurality. You need to get either to 50%, or you need to get the largest amount of votes. And if you're a small party with a small electoral base, you're just always going to lose, because you'll never get enough votes. So you have to compromise, and like with the other portions within the party, to create a larger party that can get to 50% of the vote, or at least the largest plurality within the district. So you can be much more stubborn in your ideology, in being a system where you have many little parties or many different parties through a proportional representation system. On the other hand, first past the post systems can also create more polarization because, especially in our system in the United States where we have primaries, where we get the nominees for the elections from primaries, these are usually small turnout elections where only the most committed people come to turn out to vote. And therefore, you can get to a plurality without having a large base within the electorate. And that tends to promote more polarization. And in the United States, we're finding that out right now. Different systems, like I said, either first past the post systems or the various forms of proportional representation have different effects. If you have a closed list proportional representation system, it can make it more polarized because the candidates or the legislators within a closed list are more beholden to the leaders of the party who choose their place on the list, rather than an open list system where the people get the most votes, get the highest numbers, get the number of seats based on the most votes. So there's no clean answer. Different systems have different effects in depending on how it slices out. But I would say that, overall, proportional representation systems will tend to be a little more polarizing because you can sort of dig in your heels ideologically. However, if you're talking about a governance system where you have a presidential system or you have a parliamentary system, parliamentary systems tend to promote more compromise. Whereas in systems where you have the presidential system, like we have in the United States, you have conflict between the executive and the legislature, and within the legislature itself, you tend to get a lot of polarization as well, depending on how much of a majority each party can get. So that's a long-winded answer to say, there's no one solution to getting to compromise rather than polarization. Both systems can promote it in different ways, but in terms of your governance system, definitely, I would think parliamentary systems tend to have more compromise involved in them.
All right, thank you, Josh. We don't have that much more time. There's two really great questions left that I want us to get to. I think the last one, Sadia's, this is something that Josh and I are going to have to really reflect on because I want to make sure that we give you a really nuanced answer for this because it's a very nuanced question. But I think we have time for Mamiya's. Josh, can you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you answer that one?
I would say, Mamiya, can you just explain what you mean by a constructive hierarchy? Still on?
They might not still be on. If they're,
Right.
if they're not on, yeah, you can talk.
The question is, since centralization can lead to manipulation of power as power rests with fewer people, and decentralization can minimize that, I think this decentralization also risks giving power to the uninformed. Could this constructive hierarchy work as a better alternative in electoral systems? Not knowing specifically what you mean by constructive hierarchy, I'm thinking you're talking about some sort of like blended system. Where there's a governmental hierarchy that's just more decentralized than having, say, a central election commission, but maybe having election commissions down at lower levels of provincial or district levels. Well, yeah. I have to say that I'm a big fan of decentralization in general. It just becomes much harder to manipulate the system when it's very decentralized. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, the controversy over the 2020 presidential election and this whole thing that the election was stolen. I can tell you pretty much just off the top of my head, without even having to do research on that, the chances of a presidential election in the United States being stolen is extremely unlikely. Simply because of our system is so decentralized. We don't have a central election commission at the national level. The elections are run by the individual states, and in most states, the elections are actually administered at the county level, which I'm trying to remember what the Bangladeshi equivalent would be, but it's the elections are administered at a very decentralized basis. So you would need to, in order to effectively steal an American presidential election, you would need to know which states and which districts, counties in those states were going to be the ones that would be decisive, which would be the ones where you could swing the most sort of fraudulent votes and be able to tip the balance. And then you would have to get hundreds, thousands of people who are administering the elections, secretaries of state and county boards of elections and stuff like that, to cooperate with each other, who don't know each other and don't really work together on an individual basis. So it's extremely difficult to be able to steal simply because it's so decentralized. And therefore, I'm a big fan of decentralization as much as you can do it.
Thank you. Okay, so Sadia, we're going to come back. Josh and I are going to look at this one, the question about student politics and just in general Muslim society and political integrity and secularism being contested. I hear you on this one. I've done a lot of research on Turkey, where you have a secular state and you've got a lot of Islamic influences there as well, and secularism becoming contested by some, not contested at all by others. So Josh and I will look at this. We have 2 more sessions left in this course. And so my proposal is that for the next session, Josh is going to do a really deep dive, a really special deep dive, Josh, into what in the next session? Well,
for the next session, I can talk to you guys about how quantitative research is used in the election cycle and in politics as a whole. Like I said, I'm not a pollster, but I do work in that sphere, and I certainly have, in a lot of elections campaigns, been the consumer of polls and how to go about doing that, what they're for, what they're useful for, how they're done sort of technically, why it works, and some of the pitfalls of quantitative research as well. So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
So that looks like you're getting a lot of love here on the quant. I think there's more quant heads in this group than qualitative, but I know I've got my stands as well. So I think if that's okay with all of you, that's what we'll do in the next session. I'll hand it over to Josh. In the last session, I'll dive in a little bit more into the qualitative, especially around do no harm, participatory methods, this sort of thing. And then we'll have a roadmap for the way forward, because we want to continue engaging with you. We want to continue with your research, right? This is supposed to have a practical applied component to it. But again, we can't do that in the 4 sessions. So these 4 sessions are going to set you up in where you can think about, okay, what do I want to study? Like this last question here, like this is great. But then after this, after our sessions, we can get into this and we can figure out, and because Josh and I are both volunteering our time, which we feel very strongly about. It's incredibly important that we give back to Bangladesh and that we give back to you, the students who are taking your time. Look at this, there's still 39 people here and it's so late at night for you, right? So we're here for you. We're here for you through your whole research cycle, but it can't be full time for us, right? Because we also have our other things that we're doing. But so we'll all work out with DURS the equitable approach for how Josh and I can continue supporting you and learning from you in the research that you're conducting, because you are the experts, you are Bangladeshis, you are there, you are living it, you know so much more than we do. So if that works with all of you, I think that's going to be the approach for the way forward. Fahim, what do you think?
Yep, just one comment from my side. After watching this session, listening to all of you, I think we just had like an university class, what we always have, and it felt like we need to have an exam from our participants, conduct an exam. Like, yeah, it's so amazing to hear about all the research designs and the examples you've shared. And the question answer session was amazing also. And Roman Uddin Bhai shared his views about the Dhaka election and what's happening over in Bangladesh. So I think overall, this session is done, and I believe we will have Joshua sir and Tanyel ma'am here with us in the next session. And let's see if we can add another, if we need another expert or anyone else. I don't know, because so many questions are coming in and coming in. It takes so much time. Yeah.
No,
So I think
it's
we can end
great.
this here. Please, ma'am.
All right, we'll end
If
it
you have some
here
ending
and
remarks.
hand out the notes, hand out the PowerPoint, and next week get ready for a deep dive. And I'm going to be listening because like this is going to be stuff that I'm going to be learning for the first time too. So I will be a student participant in Josh's session next week. So thank you, all of you. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, DURS. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh, sir. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night from Bangladesh and good morning, you all. ওকে, আমরা সবাই লিভ নিয়ে নেই। আমরা নেক্সট সেশনটা আশা করছি নেক্সট উইকে হবে। মাইদুল ভাই, আপনি কি হোস্ট আছেন এখনো?
জি।
আচ্ছা, তাহলে রেকর্ডিংটা ক্লোজ করে দেন প্লিজ।
আমি আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে।
আচ্ছা, এখানে